So in the case of Lana, her husband was the person receiving treatment. She was employed full-time, and she had some concerns around how she would manage the time she needed off with her employer. And she wasn't quite sure what her rights were. So one of the things we talked about there was what award she was covered by. She wasn't quite sure what her terms and conditions of employment were. Turned out in that conversation that it was quite a small business, and she didn't even really have, to her knowledge, an actual letter of employment. So she really wasn't sure what her terms and conditions were.
And over the last 12 months, she had actually taken a significant amount of time off work. Now, in that time, the company had been bought out by some new owners, and one of her main concerns was, given that she'd taken so much time off work, where does she stand, with this new buyout? Does she need to disclose what was happening? Will she be terminated for the amount of time that she has taken off? So, talking with her about that, understanding where she was coming from, the emotional side of things too, how's she feeling about this, and is that actually transferring back with her husband who's still going through treatment? So it was an interesting conversation. We needed to find out more about what the actual structure is going to look like, her roles, or the roles that within, not necessarily her, but the role that she's doing, is that going to be impacted? So there was a lot of discussion around that. He was a forklift driver at an industrial company. He had just been given treatment for cancer and wanted to speak more around, he was asked for a medical clearance to come back, and unfortunately his doctor said that he wouldn't actually sign off in the capacity of his role. So being a forklift driver, he was in control of machinery, and it did hold a risk for the others around him through the fatigue and the forgetfulness that he was suffering as an outcome of treatment. So he went back to his employer, had a bit of a discussion around what other things could I do, and at that point they identified that he could actually go in and do the pick and pack work that they do, getting the stock together. It wasn't operated by machinery, it was physical labour that he was doing, but they were able to accommodate him. He could sit down, he could be more at ease. So he went back to the doctor, explained what the agreement was between the two of them, and the doctor did sign off for him to return back to the workplace.
In Amelia's case, she had already had a significant amount of time off work, and she had been working part-time. Her concerns again were around how much more time she would be able to have off. One of the issues we talked about there was, again, her terms and conditions of employment. We also discussed what capacity her employer had in place to access services such as an employee assistance program, because that's some support to caring people as well. And some staff don't always realise that they can access those services with their current employer. And that those conversations are also confidential as well.
Her perception was that when she did return back to work, that she was given more work and more responsibility. So having those discussions with her around the facts of what else is coming through, what are the extra tasks that she is being given, and was it actually more work, or was it going through her treatment that she wasn't able to cope with that?
We talked through whether at that point she had really had a discussion with her employer about her illness. She had previously intimated to them that, or intimated to me, that they may not have been aware of exactly what her illness was.
She wanted to move into more of a part-time role. She was currently working 4 days a week, wanting to move into 3 days a week. We discussed what the impact would be, whether there were options for job sharing, that type of thing. So it was more a broad conversation around what were some of the opportunities that were available to her, and how she would take that next step.
So we talked through some of the ways that she could introduce that topic with them, and how she could work with her team manager in ways that would be able to accommodate the needs of the team as well. I suggested to her that perhaps by having that discussion with her direct manager first and seeing if there was some way that both parties' needs could be accommodated, that might be a really good first step. We also talked about that if that didn't turn out the way she was hoping it would, that she would then have some avenue to talk to the HR area in her team and get some guidance from them about what they could do to intervene. It may be a case perhaps of her having to be relocated to another team where that flexibility of hours could be more easily accommodated by the employer. So there were things that we needed to talk through there in terms of just how she would go about it. It might not be the actual work she was doing or the team she was in, but exploring other avenues within that same employer to try and meet her needs as well as theirs. In Claire's case, that did highlight some themes that have come through in other cases that I personally haven't felt comfortable to deal with. So it's not uncommon to get circumstances that start to cross into areas that are beyond, I suppose, the scope of what we're here to do. In Claire's particular example, what was uncovered during the course of those discussions was that she had had previous ongoing issues with her employer. Some of those things aren't things that we can perhaps fix or help her with at this point in time with her illness. There may be other things that we're not aware of, and that can be quite a tricky situation. So it's not uncommon in those cases to perhaps look at referring them for their own legal advice, because the issues can get quite complex. With the IR/ER side, or industrial relations and employee relations, we start to get into territory that's a little bit more legalistic, a little less understood by some of the patients or clients coming through. This is where some more professional advice might be sought in terms of helping them navigate through what their legal requirements are, understanding what their employers are allowed to do. It's not always clear sometimes for people what their exact terms and conditions of employment are. If they've been working in particularly small businesses, they might not even have an employment contract or even understand what award they fall under. So helping them with those basic industrial relations needs can be very time consuming, but can also be very, very valuable in terms of helping them navigate through and understand what their rights really are. People may feel victimised in their workplace. It may be their perception, or it could be a reality. So sometimes having to uncover the real issues that are happening there is a difficult thing to do, but one worth clarifying before you jump to any conclusions. Other ways that you can help these clients is by taking them through what their rights are as an employee, as well as, of course, what the employer's rights are. Not every employer request is going to be a negative or a provocative action. It may just be that as an employer they need to make sure that they're adhering to certain regulations as well. So being able to demonstrate to a work cover inspector that the appropriate documentation is in place or medical certificates have been received, those types of things are just an employer trying to look after their situation as well as trying to accommodate the patients. Things to do with discrimination, harassment, termination of employment. Everyone has heard these terms, but depending on the actual person's circumstances, the type of employment they're actually working under, even the type of award, they can all have an impact on whether these things are really happening or not. An employer might quite rightly be within their rights to vary somebody's employment, or an employee may be quite within their rights to request something different from their employer. Managing expectations is a thing that comes through a lot with clients. Not only do they feel themselves that they may be letting their team down because they can't physically do the work that they were able to do before, or they may feel that their team is picking up additional workload since they need to perhaps modify their hours to be part-time. That may sometimes be more a sense of how they feel rather than how the team's feeling. So helping them work through that with their employer and have some open discussions around those things. The great thing about the program is that there are people at the Cancer Council that you can talk to yourself as a volunteer who can help you understand when they have other people who may be able to take over a case from you where you feel you've reached your realm of boundary in what you feel you're comfortable doing with a particular client. So speak to them, they'll have some people available to you and be able to give you a great deal of support there as well.